Hello, everyone. We are welcome to our next Bites and Bytes event. As usual, we're going to wait a couple of minutes. All of you are on time, so thank you for that. But as usual, we're gonna give people a couple minutes just to log on. We've got a pretty good a good showing today. Lots of people interested in the topic, obviously. So just bear with us. Welcome to the new people that have just jumped in. We're just waiting a couple of minutes to give everyone time. And thanks for joining. Some of you have been in these sessions before, so you know the drill, but I'll do a quick intro shortly. Okay, one or two extras in. I think we'll kick off. Thanks again for joining. We really appreciate your time. For those of you who haven't joined these events, Bites and Bytes, we like keeping it short and sweet. We do it on a weekday in the middle of the day. As you know, we send you an Uber voucher, Uber Foods voucher for having a snack, having lunch while the event is going on. So it's sort of, you know, deliberately meant to not take up too much of your time, your valuable time, and you get to eat lunch at the same, you know, while it's happening. So it sort of maximizes the efficiency. It seems to be a format that's working, where we get very good responses, and I always say this, but we would love input for other topics. So if there's some topic that you feel you know we could cover in this amount of time, please mail us, or you know drop a message in the chat. I think we've got the next 2 or 3 decided on, but we'd love to sort of plan these events, you know, 6 months to a year into the future, and would love to hear to get your opinions. Today, Garry Ackerman is speaking. Some of you will have seen him speak before. Garry heads up Argantic, which is one of the Turrito sister companies, so part of the family. And Argantic does a lot of like app modernization, deep dive, consultative stuff in the Microsoft world, Azure, modern workplace, et cetera. We have been getting a lot of queries and work around SharePoint. SharePoint's been around for a long time. Gary's going to talk about that, but for some reason, the last 6 months, it's really been escalating. A bunch of it is because of AI. A bunch of it isn't, though. So there's been a sort of a renewed interest in SharePoint that we've seen, and that's why we're having this session today. And Garry is certainly the best person that could talk about it. So he's going to take us through a little bit of an intro, a little bit of history, and tell us why it's so important and why it's so topical at the moment. Garry, over to you.
Thank you very much. You guys can hear me? All good? Thank you, Colin, for the intro. And yes, when we were getting the team together to discuss what was going to be our next Bites and Bytes, we decided to go with something that is very topical. And as Colin indicated, we, out of the blue, over the last few months, we've got a lot of customers that have approached us specifically to deal with SharePoint in a variety of guises. And one of the things that we know about, which is something that we've been talking to customers about, which is most definitely pushing some of those customers to reinvigorate any sort of SharePoint projects that they may have had, or solutions that they wanted to employ, was the emergence of AI. And we'll talk about that a little bit later in terms of shadow IT and the role that IT now has to play to protect organizations and organizational data from abuse that could automatically extend from something like AI. But at the same time, we've got quite a few queries or requests around implementing SharePoint for what it was designed for. So it's been quite interesting, and we're not sure exactly where all of this demand came from, but we're starting to think that compliance and AI and those sort of foundational drives in organizations now have distilled into a SharePoint requirement in IT departments. For my sins, I've been involved with SharePoint one way or another since probably, and I'm going to use a laser pointer, around about this time here. I'll never forget this product here, SharePoint Services, or the earlier one was 28 megs. I can't believe it, but that's something, a package or software package could be that small in those days. But we really could see the value of the tool that Microsoft was creating. I'm not 100% sure. I was looking into the history of SharePoint itself, and I'm not entirely convinced this is a product that Microsoft built from the ground up. I think a lot of products that Microsoft currently have in their stable are products that they bought initially and then sort of tooled them as they went along. But SharePoint Portal Server most certainly was, for me, was the origin of my journey in content or enterprise content management. I wanted to look for, well, when I was researching the origins of SharePoint and coming up with a nice diagram, and I borrowed this one from an MVP who gracefully shared it with the world. I wanted to find something that could adequately show the trail of where SharePoint had actually come from. But one of the things that I inadvertently also picked up was that regardless of people's current love affairs with SharePoint or what they may have shared in the past, almost everyone refers to the fact that at some point in time they've either had a unfavorable experience with SharePoint. And this comes naturally with a product that is so versatile and has evolved in certain directions. It becomes a product that unfortunately can't please all people all of the time. So everybody at some point in time has got a story of disappointment to tell about a feature that was deprecated, or something that Microsoft never really fulfilled through the product itself. And this is, I think, to a large degree led some customers to possibly not look at SharePoint in a modern lens, or to have a look at how this product has actually evolved over time to become the foundation of enterprise content management in the Microsoft world as we know it today. And I think that's what we wanted to present today, was the give SharePoint another look in the AI and the compliance lens, because it is the product that Microsoft uses to underpin all of its risk and compliance strategies going forward, and it's very, very important. I see there was a comment there as well that people have all at some point in time experienced disappointment when Microsoft shut down certain interfaces. For me, it's a very long list. So looking further, just for those of you that don't know, and I'm sure many of you already know this, but for those of you that don't know, if you are dealing with any sort of content storage in the form of Teams or SharePoint itself or OneDrive, the underpinning technology for all of that is SharePoint. In the OneDrive world, what they essentially do is they spin up a site per user, and there's a single library in that site for that user. You can actually dig into the guts of the SharePoint admin, and that'll actually give you that exact same view, and you can see what that looks like. It's very important to understand that this is the foundational component that Microsoft is evolving and investing in for all of these tools. And you'll see as we go along as to why this starts to make a lot of sense, because when it comes to risk and compliance and the new evolution of AI, you need to have something like this that all of these products can rely on, or to use from a content management strategy. Some of the most recent projects that we're engaging with a variety of different customers is to complete what we're calling the on-prem to cloud migrations. And the biggest part of this is dealing with the file server or legacy content management systems. We've been asked to get involved with M-files, file servers that have been neglected for the last 20 years, various SharePoint versions that are out there. And we've got a very good team of people available that can help with managing this migration into the cloud. But what's key for me, though, is that when you start to look at the steps that are required in preparing for coming AI, it's one of the most vital. It's the complete your migration part. Now, many of you that were involved in Office 365 migrations in the past will have known that you normally started with your identity and security. You worked through your email side of things. And then at that point in time, it really became an option for you whether you wanted to start afresh with SharePoint and build out an intranet type application, or whether you then wanted to start migrating your files. What we're finding is that customers are in a variety of stages of evolution or completing this task. And some of them have kept putting it off because, unfortunately, it's not a very high priority. The file server, to a large degree, kind of still works. But with the threat of compliance and possible damage through AI on the horizon, customers have realized this has now become a vital step that needs to be completed. And it's something that we're very glad to see, that it's got its own self-driving motivation at the moment, which is really, really cool. When you look at the role that SharePoint plays in the cloud world that Microsoft has built, as I said to you earlier, from a product and a user-facing perspective, Teams, OneDrive, and SharePoint itself are the easiest to understand. But if you have a look at how SharePoint is woven into almost every level of application that you interact with in the Microsoft cloud, you'll see it starts off anything to do with document collaboration on the 365 platform will most certainly be underpinned by SharePoint. Any content that you're surfacing or sharing in Teams or in Outlook automatically will leverage the SharePoint environment for that purpose. OneDrive, as we mentioned earlier, and most recently, Viva and Stream are now foundationally using SharePoint for all its content management and storage requirements. And then obviously the legacy websites, intranets, that type of thing has always been around and continues to be used. We're three of projects we're busy with at the moment are very much about fixing or building proper intranet sites for customers. Now, the importance of SharePoint is and its relevance in the modern world is illustrated at the bottom end of this diagram. And the reason why SharePoint has been given this very important role is because it provides the mechanism through which you can enable your security elements, and you can leverage its extensibility, and in so doing also then ensure that your security and data protection mechanisms are still in play. The AI, obviously now in the middle of this whole lot, will start to leverage all of those going forward as well. So it's quite an important part. And when you visualize SharePoint's role in its modern lens, this is actually, for me, one of the most important diagrams that you can put together, because it really is the fundamental component that Microsoft is going to be using to protect your information and to protect your data. To look at it from a process perspective, and you'll see typically in the past when it came to information protection, it was very much a split approach. You had messaging, including things like group chats, or you all remember Skype for Business in the past as well. Those elements were always dealt with as a separate component, and you'd look at your threat protection type components as well, were very much dedicated to those platforms, and very often that have their own. And then at the bottom end of this, you'll see now you've got SharePoint files, OneNote, OneDrive for Business, all making use of the SharePoint environment to provide a protective layer around the data that you have. It gives you a classification platform of a wide variety of tools that you can use to interact with the protection tools that are available. And you'll see there's a long list of them on the right-hand side. And this type of protection mechanism has been maintained in the modern world, so that you've got your messaging in one sphere and your content management in another. However, Microsoft has drawn a line around all of them and called it the data estate. And this is now it becomes quite important, because you've got a tool like Microsoft Purview that can be leveraged to apply your content tagging and resulting policies to all of the elements that reside within this data estate per se. So when you look at the two layers that you've got here, you've got messaging on the one hand and quite literally SharePoint on the other, and it handles absolutely everything else. There's a large proportion of the things on the right that you're seeing there called legal hold, e-discovery, content searches, retention policies. All of those are being collapsed into a product that Microsoft calls Purview, which you can see at the top. In the past, you used to have mechanisms for messaging and mechanisms for SharePoint. They're now being rolled up into Purview as a product, and it will handle how it actually applies those policies and mechanisms from a search perspective, or a legal hold, or e-discovery to each of those different channels. And as a result of that, you can now see the massive importance of that SharePoint plays. In the past, for those of you that remember it, there used to be a thing called the Compliance and Risk Center that used to sit squarely on top of SharePoint itself. Now it sits in a hosted environment. It's part of the Azure offering that Microsoft has, and it's surfaced through Purview. So I know we talk heavily today about SharePoint as a fundamental content management and enterprise content management platform, but I do want to just make a very special mention of Microsoft Purview, because quite a few of the projects that we're dealing with, the point of migrating data to SharePoint is so that the organizations can start to use Microsoft Purview. Purview does span outside of that, and as a product, it's maturing very nicely from a Microsoft perspective. But when you look at the sweet spot of its most powerful variation, it involves SharePoint, because Purview has hooks directly into SharePoint. So it's very important when you look at Purview and SharePoint hand in hand, because of the hooks that it has and its ability to apply data loss prevention policies, information protection policies, and governance templates to the SharePoint environment if your data is sitting there. It's very, very important to consider this from an implementation perspective, and in our world, very close to one of the #1 reasons why SharePoint has become so topical again in the customers that we are dealing with. From an AI perspective, this is something we've been talking about quite often over the last few weeks, and that is, you need to prepare your environment for the eventual arrival of competent AI. We've seen AI at the moment in a variety of guises, and I, for one, when Copilot first came out, wasn't very impressed with its feature set, and I believe I'm not alone on that. But if you look at the evolution of AI, and specifically around shadow IT AI implementations, the preparing your environment for AI is an absolute must. And as a result, once again, that's where SharePoint shines. One of the things that I wanted to show you, and I found this rather nice diagram, it looks a bit noisy, but from our perspective, for the purpose of this presentation, the only part we're concerned with is this part here in the middle. So you'll see to the right is where Copilot is actually executing, and below is the access components and integration components that you're talking about. And you've got these rather weird AI terms, and I think AI techs will understand what grounding is in relation to what Copilot is doing. But the important part of this is you'll notice this layer around where Copilot executes, and it's between the data and Copilot itself. And what this means is that it's not a situation where you have Copilot accessing information and then stripping out what you're not allowed to see. When Copilot acts in your under your instruction, it can only use data that you have access to complete any part of the task you've asked it to do. And that's very important, because when it comes to shadow IT structures, this type of layer may or may not be available. But if you implement it at the SharePoint level or in the SharePoint type level for an organization, even shadow IT AI implementations will be limited in what they can and can't access. So for me, while this is very much a Microsoft Copilot AI architecture diagram, I think it was very important to show that in the Copilot world, it doesn't access information you don't have access to try and build out a response to you, which is very important. And that's, once again, one of the reasons why you conduct the type of exercise that we're talking about by migrating your information to SharePoint. Now, we've talked a lot about shadow IT and the importance of having your data classified and SharePoint as a platform. One of the biggest drivers of SharePoint, or reasons why customers are starting to engage with us around SharePoint implementations or moving data into a SharePoint type platform, is this notion of security by obscurity. Now, for those of you who don't know, it basically means that in the IT world for many years, we relied on the fact that users did not know how to access data to prevent them, as a means of preventing them from actually accessing the data. When you introduce AI into the equation, that changes. AI will figure out what data you have access to, and it will surface it to you as if you are allowed to use that information. We've all told the story about I think you may or may not have heard the story about an individual at a company that unknowingly shared I think it was very confidential information from a CFO or CEO, simply because they had at some point in time been given access to the CFO's mailbox for a one-time activity and never actually had the permissions revoked. So that's the type of thing that security by obscurity used to be able to achieve. It can't anymore. So this, by definition, means that you've got to look at things like your file servers now and get real serious about what you do with that information. It cannot just be a matter of leaving it accessible to people and hoping like they can't find out what it's all about, or what information they have access to, because they don't know to type a URL, that they only know how to deal with things through map drives, or they've got URLs that are saved in their favorites on their browsers. The next part of this, and when I was researching this whole lot as a real value proposition from a SharePoint perspective, was the next step in the process is now they've given it another term. It's called overshare. So if you have your information protected purely by obscurity, and your users using AI now surface this information, or if individuals using shadow IT surface the information to publicly available AI tools, you are inadvertently going to be sharing that data with the world. And you need to ask yourself whether that's something you can or can't or should do. And as a result, once again, one of the big drivers for SharePoint as a platform, because it will allow you to protect your information, make sure that individuals only have access to what they are entitled to have access to, and make sure that policies are applied to documents based on the tags that you give them, the classifications that you do. From a SharePoint perspective, I know I was talking earlier about the fact that many people have had a variety of experiences with SharePoint, and one of the things that I wanted to say was, when we start to talk to customers about SharePoint as a logical implementation, many of them, when they revisit the feature set that is now available and they look at the investments that Microsoft is making in the platform itself, they are pleasantly surprised at how well this product as a platform has evolved to the point that it is now. I've absolutely no doubt that the information protection context for SharePoint has been the biggest driver of a large proportion of the features that they've enabled over the last few years. But it really is evolving to the point where it's shining for the platform that it was always meant to be. And that to me is something that we're finding very pleasantly surprised when we start to conduct these types of assessments or presentations to customers. I see my time is almost up, so I'll get to the last point of this. We're dealing with a wide variety of different types of products and or projects, as Colin indicated early on. AI or risk or compliance preparedness is only one part of the motivation that we're experiencing with customers. And as a result, we're finding that we're doing a whole variety of different projects. In some cases, it's using SharePoint as a Power BI platform or as a Power Apps platform. Customers have a renewed interest in providing automation or making sure that they're accessing their data in a centralized and controlled way. But one of the central messages that is coming out of this is that whether you have an existing SharePoint environment that needs remediation or you want to build something from scratch, we can help you. We have the experience and the knowledge to be able to help you prepare those environments correctly and make sure that they are AI ready. And I think that is me. I think I'm just gone over 21 minutes.
Well done. Thank you, Garry.
Thank you very much, guys.
We'll do some Q&A now. I just want to share, one story. They obviously what Gary's talking around data tagging and having good policy frameworks and applying those templates to your SharePoint is crucial in the age of AI. But they're also building guardrails in. And as an example, we were early adopters. We switched on Copilot in our own organization and read the stories, the horror stories about what people were doing with it. And it was all true. So my business partner, Brian, typed in, show me the last emails that our other business partner, Louis, shared with his bank, with his personal banker. And Copilot gave him that information, sent him those emails. It turned out Brian had global reader permission, which he didn't even know he had. So that he could access all of SharePoint, but it also gave him emails of a director of the company. We did that test again recently. Brian still has global reader access, and it said, I don't think you should be looking at a director's emails. So, even though it's blocked and it's, SharePoint's underpinning this stuff and whatever rules you have in place are followed through by Copilot, they're also building some sort of common sense guardrails into the system. Having said that, I have read articles about how people are fooling Copilot for one into dodging its guardrails, and then you're back to you need to make sure that your data tagging and all of your structures are in place and done properly. As Garry says, we've seen this a million times. Like using Copilot on unrestricted data is you can do anything you want, you can find anything you want. And it does have enough logic that it can make assumptions, and if it senses what you're looking for, it can feed you information, and that might not be information you're entitled to see. So it's very relevant right now. Q&A. So I'm sure lots of you guys use SharePoint or have had experiences. Please shout, tell us. You can type something in the chat. Let us know if you've got any questions or comments. And you're also obviously welcome to email them through to us afterwards.
I see Mason's comment about it's web dev. Yes, web dev was a big investment by a lot of people, and then suddenly Microsoft just switched it off. Yeah, it was not fun.
There's a question there, Garry.
Before granting access to the data, have the AI has a user granted correct permission, then allow access? Would that be a right measure to take? It is one of the steps you've got to do. I'm assuming you ask is to make sure that before you deploy any sort of AI, you make sure that people only have access to what they need to have access to. I hope I'm reading that correctly, but that is absolutely a vital step.
Michael's got one which I'll cover, and I don't know if you're joking, Michael. Can AI be used to check what AI should not be checking? I don't know if you're joking, but that is literally what the new generations of the open AI's models do. Is they have numerous models checking each other and not just spitting out an answer immediately, but sort of getting other independent models to fact check or sanity check the answers of the first AI. So it's an iterative process, and it's one of the next big steps in AI is exactly what you're talking about. Thanks. Good questions, guys. Anything else?
Yeah, very much so. And there's a new version of it coming out again. They're making some big changes. I was just looking through some of the new stuff that they're kind of hinting at talking about in the new Ignite in a couple of weeks' time. But what we have found is that the large proportion of the functionality that they're talking about now is really much evolved towards this preparedness type thing. So yeah, adoption very much the new SharePoint is a bit of a challenge in that sense. But one of the big things that I've seen now in one of the new features is that they're going to give you a lot more control over theming. So I think one of the keys to getting the especially new generation to use SharePoint is to make sure that it looks good. And that I'm quite pleased to see is one of the things they're actually addressing for a change.
But Jean, we've everyone in the room has been in IT for a while, and adoption is always the challenge, and SharePoint's no different. I think it's being boosted a lot in the last couple of years, and obviously since COVID with remote working, but it continues. You need to continually drive adoption. Mason, you've got a question about, does Copilot live on the tenant, or is data gathered to open AI servers? This is a crucial thing that Microsoft talks about a lot. Copilot is extremely protective of your data. So when you have Copilot in your environment, it doesn't ever release any of your data or queries or the stuff that it's learning about to Microsoft. Also important to differentiate between Copilot, Microsoft Copilot, and OpenAI. Different companies. Copilot is a shareholder in OpenAI, and they have used the ChatGPT model, but that's where the similarities end. Microsoft and Copilot are going in this direction, and OpenAI and ChatGPT are going in this direction. So they are distinct products and companies now. But to answer your question, very Microsoft is extremely verbose on this. Like, your data with Copilot stays in your environment. Jean, do you have a question?
Yes, Colin. Good day, everyone. It's a bit long to type. So I think the issue we typically face is, it's an older company, so you have a large user base that's been with the company for 20 plus years or 30, 40 years. And when I talk about adoption, I think similarly, as you guys said, that the entire Microsoft stack is sort of centralizing to a certain degree. You're not talking about SharePoint, you're talking about OneDrive, you're talking about Teams and so on. And trying to get that adoption implemented. Now, when we're talking about adoption, it's not just, hey guys, here's a cool new tool, try and use it. The moment you start looking at adopting SharePoint on top of a file share server, you start uncovering knowledge management frameworks and all those type of things. Now, typical challenges that we face are stuff like, hey, I'm publishing this document now, everyone can edit it. Or I've shared this link, the next person opens up an Excel sheet, and the first thing that they do is they play around with the data, and then they change the data for everyone. So there's an extremely long adoption road that needs to be taken, because you technically have to reteach everyone how to use the basic functions of your Office products and so on. So how do you guys typically approach something like that?
Garry, do you want to cover?
Sure. It's different for different organizations. So we've found some organizations just embrace it and everybody jumps in with 2 feet. But as you've indicated as well, if you've got some experienced users that have are very used to doing things in a certain way, they can take some convincing, and it takes a while to get them to adopt the technology. But it takes a concerted effort. So it's one of those things as well, Jean-Francois, where you said it's not a matter of just showing them the tool, the nice tool, and say, hey, there's a nice tool, go and play with it. We've had to, in some cases, had to have a complete sort of campaign around getting SharePoint implemented at a company. Sometimes it takes 6 to 8 weeks. And we find that while there's a resistance initially, once the users become sort of their knowledge and understanding of how the product works starts to improve, we find that a large amount of that initial resistance will disappear. We also build in protection mechanisms like showing people how to use version control. When you do document publication, make sure that the people that own the actual space to publish the documents are the only ones that have the rights to actually publish those, and everyone else can contribute. But so it's a matter of just controlling those, and it's a different process for different companies.
Yeah, so training is crucial no matter what. But like, similarly, like if you're rolling out a new CRM or, some sort of in a business tool, you can use the approach where you choose, champions inside the organization who run with it. You can do like a train the trainer type of approach. You could get literally every single person into a room and do group training. So there's a couple of different approaches, and that's what some of the things Gary's referring to is it's different approaches for different organizations. One of the things that happens in our own organization, in fact, I've done this myself, is people that like download, they want to work on an app. So they download the document, they then change all of the settings, and then they re-upload it to SharePoint and they put it in the wrong folder. So then you've got like a protected, the director folder with top secret information, and then some idiot like me comes along, downloads it, ruins all the credentials, ruins the data tagging, and then uploads it to the marketing folder, and suddenly your whole company, sees stuff that they shouldn't. So yes, the stuff happens, and it's inevitable. But as Gary says, there's too many benefits. That it sort of, unlike some tools, it sort of picks up a momentum of its own. And then you also get the situation where if organizations are embracing it properly, you don't have a choice. You can't actually work in the old world. Everyone is sending you a SharePoint link. Everyone is telling you to look in Copilot instead of, the old, going through folders. And if that's what starts happening in your organization, you sort of don't have a choice. You get dragged along. All great questions. Anything else? We're as usual very cognizant of time, and we don't want to run over. So,
what is your view on companies using OneDrive approach for their SharePoint document management? Corlia, this is so common. We run into it all the time, and it's better than sharing a share on the file server, that's for sure. But it's not the proper way of doing it. The SharePoint as a platform is the right place for documents that belong to the company. Now you can use OneDrive in that role as well, and it's very simple and easy, and you share things, but it's not the right place. And we work with a lot of companies that we get them to evolve to the point that the content that used to exist in people's OneDrives is now put into the proper place. They put policies in place. They have proper mechanisms to train users to use those in environments. But a really good question. It's a very common use case. A lot of people, I've got OneDrive, I'll just share documents from there. It's easy enough to do. We work with customers around doing the right thing.
But something, I haven't seen it recently, but I saw a while ago is when companies got too strict with SharePoint in terms of, editing rights and stuff like that, the whole company like moves to Dropbox. So you've got to be very careful of that sort of side effect is doing too much too quickly, and then all of your users jump out the windows basically. But like I said, I haven't seen that in a while. Guys, I think we're going to wrap it up. It's 40 minutes, which is awesome. Gary, thanks for your presentation. And
no problems. Thanks for having me.
And again, thank you all for attending. We'd love to have you in the next sessions, and we'd love to hear your view on other topics or the format. Thank you. Have an awesome day.
Thank you, everybody. Have a nice day.